the State Senator Sanders for having us out this evening. I think this is a very important event, and I'm happy to be here this evening. This evening, I am primarily representing the New York City chapter of Black Lives Matter, which is a national network focused on it's a continuation or a current reiteration of Black liberation movement. So, you know, the sort of sentiment in media is that this is something new, but it's nothing new at all. It's a continuation of efforts for Black people to liberate themselves all the way, you know, from the time that we were placed on the slave ships. So while I'm here primarily representing the Black Lives Matter National Network, I am also an organizer at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, which is a civil rights law firm that has championed some historic cases, including the Voting Rights Act and Brown versus Board of Education. So I'm also available if folks are interested to answer any questions related to my work at NAACP Legal Defense Fund as well. I just wanted to speak a little bit about Black Lives Matter and our sort of philosophy around voting. And I just want to say that the Black Lives Matter, I want to make a distinction between the Black Lives Matter network and the Black Lives Matter movement, or what is also known as the movement for Black Lives. So the Black Lives Matter network actually formed after the tragic murder of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman. And it started as a hashtag. The phrase Black Lives Matter was coined by three Black women, Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi, who was local here in New York. And so it was an affirmation. It wasn't, we weren't asking for people to affirm that our lives matter. It was our own affirmation towards ourselves. It was a love note to ourselves. And so as a person of faith, I often like to say that Black Lives Matter is an act of worship, and we're simply saying what God has already said about us. And we're letting the world know what God has already said about us by declaring that Black Lives Matter. We don't need folks to let us know that Black Lives Matter. We're telling you that our lives matter. And so with that, we're here to affirm the lives of all Black people, including often Black folks that are most marginalized. So that would include queer folks, that would include trans people, that would include immigrants, that would include women, that would include sex workers, that would include you know, incarcerated people. So it's all Black people. We're fighting for the lives of all Black people. And so for me, I sort of grew up in a household in which we always exercised our right to vote, no matter what. And it wasn't just for the big elections, it was every single election, the small local elections as well as larger presidential elections. And my family legacy also includes, my great-grandfather was actually the first Black person to run for office in the town that my family's roots are in, is Crawfordville, Georgia. So that legacy really runs deep in my veins, and so I've participated in voter registration drives and have worked on campaigns for a number of different elected officials. And again, I work for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. But with all that, I'm actually a part of a network, which is the Black Lives Matter Network, that recognizes that voting can be a valuable tool in democracy, but also recognizing that we're not in a democracy, we're in an oligarchy. And so that many of the decisions that are made in this country aren't based off of a democratic popular vote where, you know, at face value, we all just go to the polls and make this assumption that our votes will be cast, our votes will count as they are cast. So with that, we sort of recognize that, and historically recognizing that voting is a tactic among many others, and that will help get us towards liberation, but that voting is not liberation. And so we're on a path to liberation and fighting for our liberation, and again, voting is one of the tactics that will help us to achieve certain objectives to get us there. So in tonight's presentation, as we move to the panel portion with the questions that are asked, I want to say that I will sort of go back and forth between the strategic ways in which we exercise our right to vote to alternative forms of civic engagement. So if I'm talking about voting, I'm also talking about alternative forms of civic engagement. And I will also speak about the ways that the Black Lives Matter Network has engaged the vote. So that includes campaigns like the Buy Anita campaign in Chicago, who was the DA that was involved in some of the corruption around the case of Laquan McDonald, who was the young man that was shot 16 times, and video footage was hidden and not revealed. Lots of stuff that happened in that case that should have been a part of public light that wasn't. And so the BLM network, along with BYP, the Black Youth Project, was a part of getting that particular Anita, drawing a blank on her last name, Anita Alvarez out of office. The same in Cleveland with the prosecutor around Tamir Rice, if you remember the 12-year-old who was murdered just playing in the park. In less than in a few seconds, 2 police officers pulled up and killed him. And so that prosecutor, who also mishandled Tamir Rice's case, was knocked out of office based on the efforts of the Black Lives Matter chapter there, as well as supported by Tamir Rice's mother. And that was the Buy Tim campaign. And so also, I'll just briefly mention some of my work at Legal Defense Fund. One of the things that we're also discussing right now is in the work in Ferguson and working with, there's a redistricting process that's happening right now. And so our work is also shaping up to include the possibility of running new candidates, new Black candidates, and not just Black candidates, but Black candidates that have the interest, that are grassroots and homegrown, that have the interest of the people who are the people who are rising up, and just everyday folks, because that's really who's designed to run for office. If this nation is what it says it is an everyday citizen. And so we are supporting the efforts of folks to run for office in Ferguson as well, to build some additional civic engagement there as well. So yeah, I'll wrap up here, and thank you so much. Happy to be here.